The new week at Fairmont Crest opens under a thin veil of mist covering the gravel paths leading into the state's most opulent enclave, where every disaster tends to begin with a small detail no one notices. A phone buzzing at midnight, a glassy stare in the gym, an amber scarf snagged beneath a car seat. People always say scandals don't appear on their own. They're cultivated by reasonable explanations, by gaps covered over with goodwill, by generous assumptions about the person you love. But when that shell begins to crack, every echo of the truth turns deafening. For Anita, the first sound was merely the steady tap of her pen on a music notebook during an evening that dragged on longer than planned, when she noticed Vernon slipping out of his chair while she was reviewing the arrangement, leaving behind a strange perfume threading itself through lyrics not yet finalized. She reminded herself of how hard her return had been, of her gratitude for a partner who had stood firm through the police investigation involving Martin and the unforgiving waves of public opinion. But gratitude couldn't mask the prickle on her skin as Vernon's plans began to align too neatly, as if he'd rehearsed a grand piece of staging. Arrive right on time, then vanish cleanly from the frame. The midnight calls at first could be justified with two words: work matters. Fairmont Crest runs on shimmering schedules and funding that moves like water beneath the domes of elite clubs. Vernon spoke often of partners, of emergency grants to help Anita's band reunite on schedule, of contractual ties if they missed the golden window. Anita didn't want to become the suspicious wife, especially when her comeback was a years-long dream pieced together by many hands, including Vernon's. But every time he stepped out of the rehearsal room, a chill seeped in, always leaving a trace. Messages that appeared only when the screen's corner lit up, a coat hung backwards, on the hook as if yanked off in haste, location history in the car showing a remote parking lot beside a quiet roadside motel where the security cameras rarely get serviced unless there's an accident. In the logistics meetings, Sharon returned like an old wind carrying the smell of rain from the band's early years. Sharon had once been Anita's closest friend, her shoulder, her second memory, the metronome who kept rehearsals running into the night. Her reappearance was explained simply as an invitation to help prepare the reunion project. Anita felt relieved to have a reliable hand, especially someone who understood the state of her voice after time away, who knew the old architecture well enough to brace the new. Naomi watched with measured caution, the way someone good at numbers watches a balance sheet sprout too many suddenly swollen columns. She didn't intrude on an old friendship, but she marked every day Vernon's newfound generosity in bankrolling the band, expenses outside the original plan, meetings that Sharon always wrapped up before Anita could add a last thought. Like the most important thing had been agreed upon elsewhere in a space meant for two. One night, an anonymous text lit up Vernon's phone like a blot of ink on a white shirt. It wasn't long, but it burned like gasoline catching fire. No classic threats, no figures, no demand for a transfer. Only a chilly sneer about running away, a forecast that time was running out, a reminder that the truth does not sit still waiting to be negotiated. Vernon panicked more because he couldn't place the source, and when you can't place the source, you start suspecting everything. He deleted the message, wiped the history, changed passwords, postponed appointments, layered on another tier of work. But the harder he chased the shadows, the thicker they grew. When a web of lies has been woven dense enough to stand, any hasty edit leaves stitched lines on the underside that can't be hidden. Sharon was different. She arrived at rehearsal on time, left on time, sent detailed notes, proposed subtle tweaks to Anita's harmonies, trimmed a few runs to preserve her stamina, praised the old grain of her voice finding its color again. But too much praise becomes a kind of balm that numbs the ear. Each time Anita tried to press further, Sharon would neatly switch the topic to logistics, to the cost of hiring support players, to stage layout and lights. She suggested a scarf as a costume accent. Soft fabric, warm amber. The idea was approved, and Anita didn't think more, until the night she bent to pick up an identical scarf in Vernon's car, the fringe faintly smudged with stage powder. Collapse never shouts at first. It arrives as a long, empty space between two breaths. Anita froze, glanced at the rearview mirror where streetlights shattered into glittering shards, and heard the familiar hum in her ears that came whenever her body absorbed a psychic blow. Reason rolled out other possibilities. A mix-up, a coincidence, a borrowed prop for a fitting. But since when did a reasonable explanation require so many layers of speculation? She set the scarf on the seat, ran a finger along the fringe as if tracing the edge of an invisible tear. A Fairmont crest. Everyone knows how to keep calm in front of a lens. No one teaches you how to keep calm in front of a truth that hasn't yet been named. Vernon returned with the regulation smile, arranging little details to look like a man who'd had a long day untangling tough problems with progress made. A week ago, that might have warmed Anita. This week, it looked over-rehearsed. She didn't explode. Anger, compressed, becomes a dark lens that makes everything painfully sharp. She observed the gap between what he said and the hitch in his heartbeat when his eyes brushed the scarf. She counted every dry swallow, every breath that didn't quite fill the lungs. Instinct, the blade people hone when they live between stage and private life, told her the truth was standing right there, missing only a name. The anonymous texts kept coming. Sometimes they appeared right after Vernon left the motel on the town's edge. Sometimes before a meeting with Sharon. Sometimes at midnight just after Anita turned out the lights. Each one struck the steady pulse of a plan that had seemed airtight. Who was holding the strings? Who had just enough extra access to his calendar? Naomi, watching from outside the fog of feeling, began connecting the dots. Money inflating the reunion project. At the same moment Vernon got the first messages. A few side payments routed through a small events company that had worked with the band in its earliest days. The history of an auxiliary account used to pay for hotel bookings under a name unfamiliar in Anita's professional circles. The more she dug, the more the fear made sense. If those expenses weren't only to ingratiate Sharon but to cushion something bigger, was this affair merely a cover to shield a financial or reputational secret? Meanwhile, Sharon's signals contradicted themselves. She tended the project with the strictness of someone who knows one misstep could topple everything Anita rebuilt. She urged breaks, sent vitamins, corrected a few punishing high notes, shifted schedules later to spare the vocal cords. Yet she was also the one abbreviating group meetings to make room for private sessions with Vernon outside the rehearsal space. In blurry parking lot camera stills, her silhouette appeared beside his, far enough to avoid intimacy, close enough that no one would mistake it for a purely professional exchange. Did Sharon truly love Vernon? Or was she maneuvering him into a choice to settle some old fixation on Anita's place in the group? Was her return at the exact start of the reunion a coincidence, or a play for the center seat Anita now held? As the web thickened, everyone began living with a private version of the truth. Vernon lived with the dread of exposure and the feeling of being blackmailed by a faceless watcher. Sharon lived with a strange urgency, demanding more while keeping the tender role no one could replace, balancing on the tightrope between possession and public image. Anita lived in the hollow between breaths, trying to protect the project of her life while asking whether the good around her was propped up by someone else's hand in exchange for something she didn't yet know. Naomi lived in the spreadsheet, in columns that don't lie, charged with warning her friend that the sum of goodwill and vagueness always adds up negative. The crescendo came when, one late afternoon near sunset, Anita found Sharon's scarf in the same spot in Vernon's car, this time scented with a perfume she'd noticed only at a wardrobe fitting. Her world shrank, not because of a strip of fabric, but because of a memory. Another night when she and Sharon had shared a scarf backstage at their first show, hand in hand, thanking each other for simply being there. Private history had become evidence of betrayal. The person who once helped her stand had become the weight pulling her under. In that instant Anita understood that the truth, however brutal, needed its right name. Otherwise it would turn to mud and swallow every decision that followed. The confrontation in the house that had been their safe place didn't break into storm at once. It moved like slow lava, incinerating the roots of assumptions. Vernon tried to tuck himself into his usual charm, but his eyes betrayed him. Words no longer flowed. When they've lied too often, They turn clumsy before the steady silence of the person across from you. Anita didn't need to shout questions. She let the room answer. Every object, every frame, every calendar entry on the wall serving as a witness strong enough to make evasion look absurd. Where is the limit of forgiveness when the injured party is not only a wife but the artist anchoring an entire reunion? Where is the edge of pride when the guilty one knows a confession could destroy not just a marriage but the very path he claims to have paved for the person he says he loves? News leaked. At Fairmont Crest, all privacy has an invisible public. A hotel receptionist chats with a delivery driver. The driver knows a stylist. The stylist is friends with an entertainment reporter hungry for a spark. Grainy parking lot photos sprouted into a story spreading like brushfire. Questions weren't asked for answers but to fuel the crowd's imagination. Is Sharon the spoiler? Or a pawn in a power game? Was Vernon dragged into a net? Or did he tie the knots? Is Anita the angel betrayed? Or a general with a blade up her sleeve waiting to strike? In the swirl of speculation, Naomi chose a quiet plan. Clamp the money lines, seal the leaks, question every odd expense tied to satellite vendors. If the secret is bigger than the heart, why all those financial cushions? Sharon began making demands Vernon wouldn't meet. She wanted daylight, acknowledgement that would end their slipping out at hours everyone knows. But going public needs more than courage. It needs a plan. Vernon was trapped between two terrors. Losing everything if he spoke and losing control if he kept hiding. Each day, the anonymous texts reminded him someone stood beyond the fence, counting his steps and waiting for the last slip. Who profits if the scandal blows? Who suffers if it stays quiet? Every question opened into a maze without signposts, and at each turn a mirror reflected a man still lying to himself. Rather than stage a loud revenge, Anita chose to gather. She reviewed every email, every appointment, every receipt. Spoke to the team in a calm tone that made everyone tread more carefully. Fortified the project by replacing loose links, moving some tasks out of Sharon's reach, and building a soft perimeter where no one could freeload authority. If forgiveness came, it wouldn't come from an apology but from the guilty accepting that truth would prune away every escape. If revenge came, it wouldn't be impulsive but strategic, teaching the betrayer that the greatest loss isn't exposure but eviction from the story they thought they were writing. Fairmont Crest turned into a stage of brief collisions and long evasions. Each party birthed a new rumor. Each bulletin offered half an answer. Sharon, once beloved as a beautiful memory, felt the air around her change temperature. Returned smiles turned cautious. Hands reached out a beat slower. Vernon, who used to walk with the confidence of a narrator, kept his gaze level with chairbacks, dodging stray lenses. Anita, in the churn, held tempo like a metronome, seeing each face suddenly become an equation of goodwill, opportunity, and curiosity. Night questions wrapped the window panes. Would she confront to cut clean, or hold her silence to script a payback so precise no one would see it coming? Did Vernon truly love Sharon, or was he stuck in a compromise dressed as passion to guard something darker? Did Sharon return for rekindled love, or to seize the spotlight and settle an old resentment? The twist the trailer promised likely wouldn't be an explosion, but the barely audible tick of a tripwire about to snap. Some say Scandal is a moral tale. At Fairmont Crest, Scandal is always a power story. If Vernon falls for love, that's a familiar tragedy. If he falls to something larger, with the affair a card played to distract, then the people counting his steps from outside are the real chess players. Naomi looks at the ledger and knows no dollar moves without purpose. Sharon looks in the mirror and knows no role is free when the scene airs in prime time. Anita looks at the stage and knows no performance succeeds when the harmony is steered by a musician not in the band. As secrets are teased loose by the night wind, Fairmont Crest shivers like a giant creature feeling thunder before rain. The question is no longer whether Anita will forgive Vernon, but how she will redefine forgiveness. Forgiveness might be opening the door so the guilty can pass through and learn the cold outside. It might be locking the door and hiding the key where no one can find it, forcing them to stand outside and realize the warmth within is no longer theirs. And between those choices lies a third path, quieter, longer, where Sharon's career is redirected by reasonable staffing decisions and contracts that simply don't renew. Where Vernon is made to face the version of himself in the mirror, the one who no longer gets to narrate. On the stillest nights, when restaurants have shut and social media's waves calm for a while, Anita sits alone with an unfinished arrangement, listening to the house breathe like a wounded body. She doesn't ask the searing questions. Every answer has a price. She asks Riverstone questions. What protects her core values? Who deserves a place inside the trust circle? Whether the reunion can live without links that have become fractures. How hard the future will require her to be so that tenderness still has room. One day the headlines will cool, the topics will drift, and the audience will return to the music instead of the rumors. To reach that day, she has to pick her battles. Which to win now, which to let time erode, which to trap and simply wait. While everyone waits for the promised twist, Fairmont Crest holds its breath. The gleaming iron gates still open each morning and close each night. But inside, the microorder has shifted. Gatekeepers learn to read the guest lists more closely. Event planners learn to verify every expense. Friends learn to hear the silence between stories. All await answers to questions tossed into the air like coins into a well. Will Anita confront Vernon outright or stay silent and orchestrate an unforeseeable riposte? Can she forgive, or will she end not only the marriage but also Sharon's career under the guise of cool professional choices? Does Sharon truly love Vernon, or is she using him to pay a debt to a past in which she felt abandoned? Why did Sharon return exactly as the reunion launched? Was it to claim the center now occupied by Anita? And finally, the thing few dare say aloud, was this affair truly a matter of the heart or merely a murky arrangement to hide a larger scheme, with love deployed as a screen for numbers that won't sit still? At the end of every question is an edge, where the one answering either stumbles or learns to fly. Anita stands at that edge without trembling now, having grasped a simple law: truth can break, but it can also release. If the truth is that Vernon truly loves Sharon, she will refuse to let her own definition of love be enslaved to someone else's. If the truth is a bigger plot, she will not allow her heart to be turned into a prop. And if the truth lies somewhere between, she will carve it into each small decision, patient as a lapidary, so every cut is clean and just deep enough. When the stage lights rise next time, the crowd may not remember every rumor, but they will recognize one thing: some music only reaches perfect pitch after passing through silence.